In this episode of the UX Tea Break, I look at choosing a usability testing method. So this particular question comes from Nicole, and Nicole was on a 5-day user research bootcamp that I was running last week. We were talking about various usability testing methods, and she rightly questioned, well, pop-up testing, she said, lab testing, remote testing, which one am I meant to choose? And I can appreciate the problem because there are so many flavors of usability testing that you can choose from. So that's what I wanted to address in this particular video. I should say before I start though that I'm talking about formative usability testing. So with a formative usability test, we're interested in finding usability problems as part of an iterative design lifecycle. We're less interested in measuring things like completion rate, time on task, user satisfaction. We're more interested in, can people actually use the system for what it's intended to? What problems do they run into? So I'm going to be talking about ways of choosing a formative test method. If you're interested in summative testing, then you can stop watching the video now because I'm not going to be talking about those. So looking at formative test methods, which one should you pick? Because there is a wide variety of methods we can use. So I thought I'd put together a flowchart. Let me dive in and show you that flowchart now and show you the way I would choose a formative usability test method. So the first question I'll ask is, do I need quick answers to very specific research questions? So, for example, I might want to understand whether or not people can understand a question that's asked on a form, or I may have a research question which is, can people use some kind of newfangled search tool that allows them to enter their travel dates? You can think of these as kind of micro tasks that could usually be completed in 5 or 10 minutes, because that's often, there are situations where we only have that amount of time. But if you've got a very specific question like that, you're not interested in a full-blown usability study, but you've got those very specific questions you want addressed. In that case, what I'd recommend is you carry out either a pop-up test or a remote unmoderated test. With a pop-up test, you'll go to where your users hang out, like a coffee shop, for example, and you'll see if you can get them for 5 or 10 minutes to answer these very specific research questions. With remote unmoderated tests, then often you'll go to an organization that has a panel of users that know how to video themselves as they carry out tasks, and you could use remote unmoderated testing for that. If the answer to that question is no, then what I would do next is ask another question, which is it difficult to simulate vital aspects of the user's context in a lab environment? So, for example, people might use other products alongside your one, and you're not able to simulate that in the lab. Or maybe people that you're running the test with use assistive technology and it's very highly customized, and you're not able to do that ahead of time. Or it might be that the context of use is particularly noisy or there's lots of distractions. If that's the case, then you won't be surprised to say that I recommend you carry out some kind of in-context test. In other words, you go into the user's home or office to run the test. Or you could run a remote moderated test. So with that, you'll screen share with the participant and you'll ask them to carry out tasks as you observe them using the system and other systems that they need to interact with. The next question I'll ask is, do participants live in disparate locations or are they unwilling to travel to us? For example, you might have a small number of users and they're dotted across the country or indeed in other countries, and it makes it very difficult to get to see more than one of them in a day. Or it might be your participants have jobs that make it difficult to travel to you. For example, they might work as a GP, or they might have responsibility as a carer, for example. If that's the case, then again, I'd look to remote moderated testing as a useful method, because that way people don't need to invest a lot of time in taking part in your test. If the answer to that question, though, is no, in that case, I'll have another question, which is, do stakeholders or members of the product team need some exposure hours to users? The reason I'm asking this question is there's good evidence that the best way to improve the design of a product is to make sure that every team member gets to watch real users carrying out tasks with the team's designs. And that's because observing usability tests helps developers and engineers realize that users are not like them. Now, if your team hasn't done much of this, if they haven't had much exposure to users, now's your chance. So what I would do in that particular situation is carry out kind of classic testing in a lab-based environment, or perhaps a multi-room setup. So the difference between a classic testing lab, that would be your one-way mirror, the kind of focus group facility that we're all very familiar with. A multi-room setup is the same kind of thing, except they use video technology instead. So you're in one office, one room in a building, your users are in another office with the moderator, the test takes place there, and that information's beamed to the room so other people can observe it. So it's like creating a usability lab in your own office, and often you get dedicated labs that are like that use video technology instead. But they're ideal for this kind of thing where you want to get people on the team to observe users. If the answer to that question, though, is no, then what I would do is I would turn to a single room setup. So a single room setup, and the reason I've highlighted it in red here is because if you're not sure what method you should use, this is the one to go for. A single room setup is where you go somewhere with your user. Any quiet room in your office is fine. It could be a meeting room that you might normally use. It doesn't need to be a dedicated facility, but you sit with them and you ask them to carry out tasks. It's a moderated test, and those kind of tests, they're probably, I'd say, they're the best value for money in terms of kind of insights. In terms of insights for money, that's the best kind that you can go for. Alternatively, you could use a remote moderated test instead, but that would be my kind of thinking process about deciding which particular formative usability test method I should use. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Ask a question and hopefully I'll get around to that in a future video.